In the distant reaches of the galaxy, a species known as the Haari had terrorized countless star systems for centuries. They were a race of immense power, intelligence, and cruelty. No one had ever dared challenge their dominion. Their ships, sleek and silent, roamed the stars, and their warriors were practically indestructible. They could wipe out entire civilizations in the blink of an eye, and no one had ever managed to stop them. Not until one human, a lone figure from a backwater world, changed everything. It all started with an unexpected transmission that echoed across the galaxy. The message was short, but it carried an unmistakable weight. The Haari are coming. On Earth, the announcement was met with a collective gasp. No one knew who had sent the message, or why. But the mere fact that someone knew of the Haari's impending arrival was enough to throw the entire planet into a panic. Governments scrambled, military forces mobilized, and the world's brightest minds were pulled into high-level meetings. Among them was a young scientist named Elias Kane, a man with no military training, no history of interstellar diplomacy, and a reputation for being a little too curious for his own good. Elias had always been a loner, fascinated by the unknown, obsessed with the uncharted mysteries of space. His latest research, an obscure theory about a hidden weakness in seemingly invincible species, had caught the attention of the Global Defense Coalition just weeks before the warning. The theory was radical, and to most it was laughable. But Elias had a reputation for solving the impossible. "You're not one of them," General Sarah Holden, leader of Earth's defense forces, had told Elias during their first meeting. "You're a scientist. We need soldiers, commanders, not dreamers." Yet, when the news spread of the Haari's impending arrival, there was no one else the coalition could trust with the task of uncovering what this alien species was truly vulnerable to. That's how Elias found himself thrust into a situation far beyond his control. He wasn't a soldier, but perhaps, just perhaps, his theory was the key. Days later, the Haari arrived, their massive, imposing ships hanging in Earth's orbit. A sense of dread washed over the planet as communication attempts were rebuffed, their intentions shrouded in silence. They made no demand, no request, just an ominous presence in the sky that hinted at destruction. And the worst part? Earth's military had no idea how to fight them. Elias was sequestered in an underground bunker, working day and night on his research, trying to find any possible loophole in the Haari's invulnerability. According to his calculations, their technology was incredibly advanced. But there was one thing Elias had noticed, a subtle inconsistency. Their ships, though invulnerable to most forms of attack, seemed to have one major flaw. They lacked a proper cooling system. The Haari ships were incredibly powerful, yes, but their power source ran dangerously close to overheating. Elias had an idea that could exploit this weakness, but it was a long shot, one that could easily fail. As the days stretched on, tension grew. The Haari's ships began launching smaller crafts, robotic drones designed to infiltrate Earth's atmosphere. No one knew what they were for, but the fear that followed them was palpable. Was it a reconnaissance mission, or was this the beginning of an invasion? Meanwhile, Elias continued to experiment with his idea. But every failed attempt only fueled the growing sense of hopelessness. Earth's leaders were becoming desperate, looking for any solution. If the Haari decided to unleash their full power, it would mean certain annihilation. And yet, Elias couldn't let go of the small, fragile thread of hope his theory represented. One evening, as Elias stood before a screen filled with data, a sudden flash of insight jolted him. It wasn't just the ships. What if the Haari themselves were vulnerable to the same flaw? What if their biology, so heavily engineered and augmented, mirrored the ship's weaknesses? They were a species of warlords, yes, but they were also built from the same formula. Too powerful, too confident, and ultimately, too fragile. His fingers flew over the console, connecting pieces of data, running simulations, and cross-checking biological anomalies in Haari physiology that might suggest a similar vulnerability. The moment the solution revealed itself, Elias could hardly believe it. There was, in fact, a way to strike at the heart of the Haari empire, a single point where they could be brought to their knees. But Elias knew he couldn't do this alone. Time was running out, and the threat was growing closer by the minute. He sent out an encrypted message to General Holden, revealing his findings. "I know how to defeat them, but we have to act fast." General Sarah Holden was not one to easily trust a scientist with the fate of the world. Yet, after reviewing Elias's findings, she couldn't deny the chilling sense of possibility that his theory presented. The Higorei had never been challenged before, and it was clear they had no intention of negotiating or peacefully coexisting with Earth. If they were to survive, they had no choice but to rely on the very thing that had once been their greatest strength: human ingenuity. "You've got to be kidding me," General Holden muttered as she scrolled through Elias's encrypted transmission for the third time. "They're not invincible, they just think they are." Elias's analysis pointed to a specific vulnerability in the Higorei's central nervous system, a result of their aggressive cybernetic enhancements. Though they had the power of advanced bioengineering on their side, Elias had theorized that their augmentations had rendered them dependent on specific neural feedback loops to maintain their strength. If those loops could be disrupted, the Higorei would be rendered powerless, vulnerable. The problem was that the technology needed to carry out such a task was still experimental. Elias had no proven prototype, no field-tested weapon. He needed to develop a new kind of pulse that could interfere with their neuroelectric systems. But that would require a massive amount of resources that were not readily available in Earth's current state of disarray. "Their ships are made of a material we can't even penetrate, let alone use as a shield," General Holden said, looking over Elias's specifications. "How do you expect us to even get close enough to use this pulse?" Elias, standing in front of a board littered with mathematical models and experimental data, only paused before replying. "I don't. But I think they'll come to us." In the following days, the Higorei's presence above Earth only grew more ominous. Their ships, still silent and unyielding, began deploying swarms of drones, which scoured the surface of the planet, collecting data and identifying potential sites for invasion. Every passing hour made humanity feel smaller, more insignificant in the shadow of these extraterrestrial behemoths. But Elias's plan wasn't about defeating the Higorei in a conventional sense. It wasn't about using Earth's dwindling resources to match their superior technology. Instead, he realized the key lay in subverting their expectations. The Higorei were used to overwhelming force, to direct confrontation. What they weren't prepared for was subtlety, misdirection, and human creativity, traits that had always been Earth's greatest strengths. Elias reached out to General Holden with a daring proposal. "We need to lure them in. We need to get their attention. I believe their leadership, the highest ranks of the Higorei, are still on their flagship. That's where the vulnerability is. We don't need to destroy their whole fleet. We need to strike where it will hurt the most." Holden hesitated. "And how exactly do we do that? We can't afford a drawn-out battle. We need a clear, decisive plan." "Simple," Elias said, his eyes glinting with the excitement of a breakthrough. "We use their arrogance against them. We'll launch a series of false flag attacks, nothing major, just enough to make them think they're under attack from an unknown enemy. That will get their high-ranking officers to come down to Earth, or at least closer to the atmosphere. Once we draw them in, we can hit them with the pulse." Days of preparation passed as the world scrambled to ready itself for the assault. The global defense network shifted into high gear, coordinating with underground resistance groups and deploying a fleet of stealth fighters equipped with holographic decoys to simulate attacks from various directions. On the day of the operation, Elias found himself standing in front of a makeshift command center, eyes glued to a screen that displayed live footage from several different parts of the world. The drones were already in the air, broadcasting fake transmissions to simulate Earth's resistance. It was working too well. The Higorei were reacting exactly as Elias had predicted. "Commander, we have incoming," one of the operators shouted, his voice full of urgency. "Their flagship is on course. They're heading directly for our location." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The time had come. The Higorei were about to take the bait. "We've got one shot at this," Elias said, as he turned to face General Holden. "Once they're in range, we'll hit them with everything we've got. But it has to be precise. No mistakes." General Holden gave a sharp nod. "We won't let you down." As the Hagoryai flagship descended into Earth's atmosphere, the world held its breath. Humanity's fate rested in the hands of a single human who had never fought a battle in his life, let alone face an alien species considered untouchable. But in Elias Kane's mind, it wasn't about strength or power. It was about precision and intellect. Elias had no idea what would happen next, but he did know one thing. He would use their overconfidence against them. And that was the first step in defeating the unbeatable. The Hagoryai flagship, a colossal ship that seemed to blot out the sky, cut through Earth's atmosphere like a blade slicing through air. Its hull, dark and angular, radiated an eerie sense of authority. It hovered above a sprawling military base in the heart of Europe, its vast array of sensors scanning the terrain below. For all their technological prowess, the Hagoryai had failed to account for the one thing that had been humanity's advantage for centuries: unpredictability. Inside the makeshift command center, Elias Kane stood frozen in front of a massive display. The large, spherical holographic projection of the flagship's trajectory had been updated in real time. His pulse was quickening. This was it. The moment everything hinged upon. "Approaching target zone in 5 minutes," the lead technician announced. The room was filled with an intense, palpable focus. All eyes were on the massive display. The countdown had begun. Elias glanced over at General Holden, who stood beside him, arms crossed, her face unreadable. The military personnel behind them spoke in low, tense whispers, preparing for a moment they hoped they wouldn't have to face: the total annihilation of their world. "All systems are go," Elias said, trying to steady his voice, though the weight of responsibility bore heavily on him. He was no soldier, no warrior. But if his calculations were correct, Earth might have just found the one thing the Hagoryai couldn't anticipate: a weapon built not from brute force, but from understanding their vulnerability. The weapon, if it could even be called that, was a sophisticated, experimental pulse generator. It had taken Elias weeks to perfect, combining theories on neuroelectric feedback loops with the technology he had scavenged from Earth's experimental weaponry. The goal was to send a focused pulse directly at the flagship's neural core, disrupting its internal systems and, hopefully, its command structure. The Hagoryai were not just machines, they were hybrids, a blend of organic and synthetic matter. And like all hybrids, they had weaknesses. "All teams prepare the pulse," Elias ordered, his voice steadying as he took his place before a row of technicians. "On my mark, we fire." In the control room, the pulse weapon was activated. A glowing sphere of energy appeared, humming with an almost terrifying intensity. It was mounted on a satellite, positioned in a perfect arc to strike the Hagoryai flagship. Every second felt like an eternity. Elias could see his reflection in the glass screen before him, pale, anxious, but resolute. He'd pushed everything to this point, and there was no turning back now. Outside, the flagship's massive shadow loomed closer. "Mark," Elias shouted. The pulse weapon activated with a resounding hum. A stream of electric blue light shot upward into the sky, trailing behind it a stream of compressed energy that bent the air around it. The pulse reached the flagship within moments, the strike directed precisely at the weak point Elias had calculated: its central command node, buried deep in the heart of the ship. For a brief, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire sky above them crackled with energy. The flagship trembled. The sleek, imposing exterior of the Hagoryai ship began to shimmer, distorting as if it were suddenly made of liquid metal. Its engines flared, sputtering and stuttering. The lights on the ship flickered, and the once perfectly synchronized drone swarms that had been hovering around Earth began to lose their composure, crashing into one another, spiraling out of control. "We've hit them," Elias whispered in disbelief. But the room's silence was shattered by the shriek of an alarm. A technician's voice cracked over the intercom. "The flagship is responding. It's retaliating." The Hagoryai were adapting faster than Elias had anticipated. Despite the damage to their neural systems, the alien technology was far from fragile. The flagship was still operational, barely. Its weapon systems, though erratic, were still functioning. Suddenly, blinding beams of light erupted from its hull, aimed directly at the military base below. "They're attacking. They're attacking," a voice screamed. General Holden's face hardened. "We can't let this ship escape. Activate the second pulse now." Elias's heart dropped. "We don't have enough power to fire a second pulse. This was a one-shot deal." "I don't care." General Holden snapped. "Do it. We'll hit them again, or we'll all die trying." Desperation filled the room. The first pulse had thrown the flagship into disarray, but the Higorii were retaliating with force that would devastate Earth's defenses. They were clearly on the brink of losing control, and the Higorii were far from ready to retreat. Elias's mind raced. The first pulse had worked. The flagship was weaker, vulnerable. But that didn't mean it was down. Elias wasn't a soldier, but his years of research had taught him to think beyond the obvious. A single moment of clarity hit him. The pulse generator was not the only weapon they had. The second pulse, the one that General Holden demanded, wasn't the key. Elias's solution lay elsewhere, the ship's own damage systems. "We don't need to fire again," Elias said, almost too calmly. "We need to disable their weapon systems." "Explain," General Holden barked. Elias pointed to a nearby console, displaying the flagship's failing energy grid. "If we hijack their command systems, we can destabilize their weapons targeting mechanisms. They'll be forced to go offline, to reboot." It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but the alternative was Earth's destruction. If they couldn't get control of the Higorii flagship now, everything would be lost. Without waiting for a response, Elias dashed toward the central terminal. His fingers flew over the keys as he initiated the hack. The screen flashed with encrypted symbols, a sea of foreign characters that made little sense, but he ignored the panic rising in his chest. He had one chance to succeed, and one mistake would cost billions of lives. Come on," Elias muttered under his breath. As the seconds ticked by, the energy surge continued from the Higorii ship, its attacks growing more erratic. But just as Elias reached the final line of code, the entire facility shuddered. The hacking protocol was in place. He hit enter. For a moment, there was nothing. And then, the Higorii's weapon systems fell silent. The flagship's offensive immediately halted, its beams of destructive energy cutting out. The ship's once deafening hum became a low, groaning sound, its systems failing in a spectacular cascade of sparks and glowing lights. Elias stood frozen, staring at the screen. Then, the impossible happened. The Higorii flagship began to descend, its engines sputtering and failing as it drifted toward the Earth below. Their grip on the battle was slipping. But this wasn't over. The Higorii flagship, though crippled, wasn't yet destroyed. Its descent into Earth's atmosphere was controlled, albeit sluggish. Sparks flew from every angle as its damaged systems tried and failed to regain full control. The once imposing ship was now nothing more than a falling titan, still capable of massive destruction, but without the power to strike back. Yet, in that moment of weakness, Elias knew this was their only chance. General Holden's voice broke through the tension in the command center. "Deploy the rapid response team. We need to secure that ship before they can recover. Full evacuation of the military base, now." Elias, still in front of the console, ran the calculations again in his mind. The flagship would land within the hour, and the closer it got to Earth's surface, the more dangerous the situation would become. With their weapons offline, the Higorii would be desperate, and desperate aliens were never predictable. He turned to Holden. "You don't have much time. They're going to adapt quickly. If you're going to board that ship, you'll need to disable their command center while it's still vulnerable." Holden met his gaze, her face grim but resolute. "We'll need a way inside, and your pulse weapon won't be enough to stop them completely. We can't risk a fight. It's a full infiltration operation, Kane." Elias paused, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. They couldn't afford to fight the Higorii in their stronghold. If they wanted to win, they had to strike at the heart of the ship, its nerve center. And it had to be quick. Then I'll go with them, Elias said, surprising even himself. I know their systems. If I can get inside the flagship's core, I can take control completely. But I need to be there. Holden stared at him, then nodded once, a silent agreement passing between them. All right, we'll get you in. Within an hour, a crack team of special forces had been assembled, ready to board the crippled Higorei ship. They were Earth's best, outfitted with experimental gear that could withstand the pressure of space and the unfamiliar environment of the alien ship. But they still had no idea what awaited them inside. Elias was suited up and ready to go, his mind racing. He had worked out the theoretical details of how the Higorei's command systems functioned. But theories were nothing without practice. And the reality was far more dangerous than anything he could have prepared for. The team was loaded onto a stealth shuttle, which was launched toward the flagship's hull. As they drew closer, Elias felt a strange sense of detachment. The vessel, though failing, was still an imposing sight, with its jagged, metallic exterior glowing faintly in the atmosphere. The shuttle rocked as they passed through the outer layers of debris and energy fields still surrounding the ship. They were in. Stay sharp, the team leader barked. We don't know what we're dealing with. Kane, you're with me. Elias nodded. He had no military training, but this was the moment he had prepared for, the culmination of his theory, the chance to finish what he had started. The shuttle docked on the flagship's lower hull with a violent jolt. The outer hatch slid open, and the Special Forces team moved quickly, their boots thumping heavily on the alien metal floor. Elias followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. Stay quiet, stay quick. We have less than 15 minutes to get to the command center before they reset their systems, Elias muttered, half to himself and half to the team. The corridor they had entered was narrow and dimly lit, filled with alien technology that hummed with a strange, unsettling energy. The Higorei's presence was overwhelming, an oppressive force that seemed to seep into every corner of the ship. A low, mechanical sound echoed through the walls. Something was moving. Something was awake. The team froze. What was that? The leader hissed. Elias quickly assessed the situation, his eyes scanning the darkened hallway. He recognized the sound. Maintenance drones. These robotic entities were designed to repair the ship's internal systems, and they were programmed to eliminate intruders. Without hesitation, he pulled out a small EMP device from his pack, activating it. The device crackled, sending a pulse through the corridor. The maintenance drones, which had been rounding the corner, froze mid-motion before collapsing to the ground in a heap of sparks and mechanical groans. The team exhaled in relief, but Elias knew they couldn't afford to be so lucky again. Keep moving, Elias said, his voice tense. The team pushed forward, rounding corners and descending into the ship's belly. As they neared the command center, the air grew colder, the lights flickering erratically. Elias's breath quickened. He could feel the pulse of the Higorei's remaining power seeping through the walls, the last vestiges of their strength before they were fully shut down. The command center doors loomed ahead, massive, metal, and scarred by centuries of use. Elias stepped forward, taking a deep breath, preparing for the most dangerous moment of his life. The team leader punched in a series of codes, bypassing the first security layer. The doors groaned open, revealing the core of the Higorei's operations. Inside, the room was alive with energy, glowing consoles, alien screens, and bizarre interfaces all pulsed with an eerie light. In the center of it all stood a massive neural network, a glowing core that was the heart of the Higorei's command systems. Elias's stomach clenched. This was it, the ship's central control. Before he could take another step, a voice boomed through the room, deep and resonating. You think you have won, human? Elias whipped around, only to find a figure stepping from the shadows, a Higorei warlord, standing tall and fierce, their eyes burning with an unnatural glow. The creature smiled. You've only just begun to understand what you're up against. The battle for survival was no longer just a matter of systems and technology. Now, it was a fight for the future of humanity. The Higoryai warlord towered before them, its presence overwhelming. Its tall, muscular frame, enhanced with cybernetic augmentations, exuded an air of ancient, brutal power. Elias's heart skipped a beat, but he steeled himself. This was not the first time he had faced overwhelming odds. But this was different. The warlord was a living weapon, far more dangerous than anything he had faced in his research. The creature's voice was low, guttural, its words laden with an air of arrogance. You think you can defeat us, human? We are the Higoryai. We have conquered entire galaxies. You are nothing. Elias swallowed hard, his mind racing. The plan he'd painstakingly devised had been based on the assumption that the Higoryai would be unprepared for the pulse weapon. But it had always been more about taking out the fleet, weakening them enough to create a fracture in their defenses. But now, standing in the heart of the Higoryai flagship with the warlord before him, Elias realized there was something even more terrifying than their technology, their relentless belief in their superiority. He glanced at the Special Forces team behind him. They were prepared to fight, but Elias knew that confronting this creature head-on would end in disaster. They couldn't afford a direct confrontation with such a formidable foe. The warlord's glowing eyes flicked over the team. Pathetic, it sneered, stepping forward. You believe you've won. You've only delayed the inevitable. You may have disabled our ship's systems temporarily, but we are already preparing to rebuild. You will fall, just as the rest have. Elias's mind spun. He needed to buy time, something, anything, to disrupt the warlord's advance. The pulse weapon had done its job. The flagship was still crippled, but the Higoryai were resilient, and their leader's confidence was palpable. He needed to outsmart them one more time. I'm not trying to win, Elias said, his voice steady, though his mind raced. I'm just trying to make sure you don't destroy everything. The warlord's smirk faltered, just slightly. What do you mean? Without warning, Elias lunged forward, slamming his hand onto a console. He'd programmed it as a failsafe, a last-ditch attempt to buy time. A low hum echoed through the chamber as a new pulse began to form within the Higoryai ship. It wasn't a weapon this time. It was a signal, a beacon. Listen carefully, Elias said, his eyes never leaving the warlord. While you were distracted by us, I sent out a signal. Your ship's remaining systems are not as secure as you think. Your own fleet is already aware of your situation. The warlord froze, its eyes narrowing. You are lying. No one can hack our systems. Elias's lips curled into a thin smile. Maybe not. But you're not the only ones who have made enemies. The warlord growled, moving forward, but Elias stepped back, gesturing to the glowing console behind him. In a few minutes, every Higoryai ship still in orbit will know what you're planning. And I can guarantee you that the remaining fleets are not going to be pleased. The moment this flagship falls, they'll turn on you. They won't let you destroy humanity. They'll turn on their own. The warlord's expression changed, its arrogance replaced by a flicker of doubt. Elias had no proof, but the strategy was simple enough. The Higoryai had ruled through fear and domination for so long, they had no idea what to do with dissent. Any sign of weakness, any indication of rebellion, would send their fractured empire into chaos. The Higoryai were powerful, yes, but they were not united. The galaxy was full of enemies waiting for an opportunity. For the first time, the warlord hesitated. Don't believe me? Elias pressed. I've been studying your people, your hierarchy. You're not as invincible as you think. And when your enemies find out you're crippled, when they realize you're vulnerable, you'll have no one left to turn to. The warlord snarled, but Elias could see the tension in its movements. For all its strength, for all its rage, the warlord was beginning to understand something. It was exposed. And exposed in front of the one species that had always been underestimated. Humanity. The Higoryai's reliance on fear was their greatest flaw, and Elias had played on it perfectly. The warlord roared and launched itself at Elias, its massive form blurring with speed as it aimed a devastating strike. But the human scientist, despite his lack of combat training, wasn't standing still. He had anticipated this moment, this final desperate attempt to crush him. At the last second, Elias ducked, narrowly avoiding the warlord's strike. The force of the attack sent shock waves through the room, and in the chaos, the Special Forces team sprung into action. They were well trained, and while they couldn't match the raw power of the warlord, they knew how to take advantage of a momentary distraction. One of the team members tossed a grenade-like device at the warlord's feet, emitting a high-pitched sound designed to disrupt cybernetic enhancements. The warlord staggered, disoriented for a moment. Elias took the opportunity. Now, he hit the console again, activating a secondary sequence that sent a powerful electromagnetic pulse through the ship's core. This wasn't the pulse that had disabled the flagship's weapons. It was a targeted EMP, designed to overload the warlord's cybernetic augmentations. The warlord's body shuddered, a series of sharp cracks echoing through the room as the machine parts in its limbs short-circuited. For a split second, the warlord faltered, its enhanced strength faltering under the pulse. Elias didn't waste the moment. He rushed forward, grabbed the warlord's arm, and twisted it just enough to send the alien crashing to the ground. But even as the warlord fell, Elias knew the battle wasn't over. The flagship was still descending toward Earth. The warlord was disabled, but the Hagorii weren't going to give up so easily. Their empire was vast, and they would stop at nothing to recover their lost ground. "Get to the control room," Elias shouted, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "We need to finish what we started, before it's too late." With the warlord temporarily subdued, the team moved forward, their mission more critical than ever. Elias had proven that a human could stand toe-to-toe with the Hagorii, but now he had to prove that one human could bring them to their knees. Time was running out. The flagship groaned, its systems on the verge of collapse as Elias and the Special Forces team surged through the command center. The warlord was down, disabled, but not out. Even now, it was struggling to reassert control over its cybernetic augmentations, its massive frame twitching involuntarily. But they didn't have time to finish the job. The countdown to Earth's destruction had already begun. "We're almost there," Elias called, his voice urgent but steady. The console ahead of them was the heart of the Hagorei's command systems. They needed to seize it, shut it down, before the flagship could re-establish control. The walls around them hummed with the energy of a dying beast. The ship's core was beginning to destabilize. It had been designed to be self-sustaining, but now that its central control systems were in disarray, everything was coming apart. Systems flickered in and out, and the eerie hum of the flagship's technology grew louder, more erratic. Elias and the team reached the Central Command interface. The glowing symbols on the console seemed to pulse in time with the warlord's ragged breathing, its cybernetic systems still struggling to come back online. Elias didn't flinch. He knew what had to be done. "This is it," he said. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the interface. "I need you all to cover me. The ship's systems are still trying to reset. If we don't lock it down now, we're all dead." The team fanned out, weapons raised, eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The warlord, still sprawled on the floor, glared at them with fiery, hate-filled eyes. But it couldn't move. Not yet. Elias took a deep breath and began typing furiously on the console. Alien characters flashed across the screen, and his heart raced. Every keystroke brought him closer to victory, but every second brought them closer to their inevitable end. If the warlord regained control, if the flagship's weapons reactivated, humanity would be finished. The seconds stretched, each one an eternity. Elias was sweating now, his fingers aching as he forced his mind to focus. The core was responding to his commands. Its systems were beginning to recalibrate, but it was still unstable. His mind raced. The Hagorii were not stupid. They wouldn't just let him shut down their flagship. Suddenly, the room seemed to ripple with the intensity of the warlord's remaining power. Elias didn't look up, but he could feel the shift. The air felt heavier, darker. The warlord had gathered enough strength to move. It leapt forward with a howl of rage, a sound that vibrated through the walls. The team opened fire, but it was already too close. The warlord's augmented limbs smashed against the walls, sending debris flying as it charged, its glowing eyes locked onto Elias. It was an unstoppable force, a weapon forged for one purpose: to destroy. Elias's mind sharpened, and in that split second, he made a decision. He slammed his hands harder onto the console, overloading it with an influx of data, faster than it could process. The core hummed, a surge of energy pulsing beneath his fingertips. The warlord was closing in, just inches away, its claws outstretched. But Elias didn't flinch. His fingers moved over the interface with precision. One final command, one final push. The ship shuddered. The warlord screeched as its cybernetic enhancements began to glitch, its own body turning against it, its limbs jerking violently as its internal systems overloaded. It stumbled, caught in a net of malfunctions, and finally collapsed to the floor with a thunderous crash. The flagship's main console flickered violently, then went dark. The pulse of energy subsided, and the air seemed to settle. Elias didn't move. He didn't dare. The warlord was down, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down just yet. Then came the voice. "Did you think this would stop us, human?" Elias looked up, his heart pounding. The warlord's eyes glowed, but the light was fading, its body twitching uncontrollably. "You don't understand," the warlord continued, its voice a rasp. "We are not alone. The Higorii Empire will never fall. Even if you destroy me, my species will rise again. You cannot stop what is inevitable." Elias's breath caught in his throat. But there was no time for fear, no time for hesitation. He slammed his palm against the console once more, finalizing the shutdown sequence. The last connection to the Higorii flagship's command systems died. There was no response, no retaliatory strike. The flagship's lights went out. The hum of alien technology faded. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, like time itself had been suspended. And then, slowly, the ship began to plummet. Elias stood frozen, staring at the warlord, who was now motionless on the floor, its once mighty form nothing more than a heap of broken metal and flesh. The silence in the command center was deafening. It was over. The flagship had fallen. But even as they stood victorious, Elias knew this wasn't the end. The Higorii were a species built on the foundation of survival and conquest. There would be more of them. Their empire, though fractured, wasn't dead. They would rebuild, regroup, and return with a vengeance. And yet, as Elias and the team stepped back from the terminal, the earth-shattering reality of what they had accomplished hit him. They had done it. They had taken down an empire. But more importantly, they had proven something far more profound. One human, against impossible odds, had not only survived, he had defeated the untouchable. And that was a victory that would echo across the stars. The flagship's final descent burned through Earth's atmosphere, crashing into the barren wasteland of what had once been a thriving city. The Higorii were defeated, for now. But the message had been sent. Humanity was not to be underestimated.